Section 2.2, solving literal equations, or I call it solving formulas. Literal means what? Equations with many variables, such as d is equal to r times t. If you remember, d was distance, r was speed, and t was time in that motion formula. So the question is, if the speed of a car is 60 miles an hour, and it took the car to go from point A to point B in 2 hours, what was the distance? How far did the car travel? So if you just go to the distance formula and kind of like what? Replace the R with 60, the T with 2, you get what? 120 miles. That's how far the car traveled from point A to point B in 2 hours with the speed of 60 miles an hour. Now the question is, what if I give you the distance and the time, how would you find the speed? Well, if you go back to the same formula, which is d is equal to r times t, replace the distance with 60 and what? Replace the time with 3. In this case, to find r, I have to what? Divide both sides, because that's kind of like 60 is equal to 3 times r. I need to divide both sides by the amount of time. So the 3's cancel, so r is equal to what? 20 miles per hour. So the question is, what just went behind the scene? Remember, we were given d is equal to r times t. And in part B of the problem, so if this is part A and this is part B, we were asked to find the speed. So the question is, how would you manipulate the formula so you can directly find the speed without going back to the original formula? So the idea was, which we didn't see it, but it just happened behind the scene, was to solve this equation for what? R. So what you do, you go to the side of the equation where your variable is located. Like in this case, on the right side, I see r. I'm trying to solve for r. So what I do is take a look at the operation between r and t. I see a multiplication. So opposite of multiplication is what? Division. So what I do, I divide both sides by time. So the t's cancel. So lo and behold, what? R, the speed, is equal to what? Distance divided by what? Time. So going from this formula, formula number 1, to formula number 2, that's called solving literal equation, or solving a formula for a what? Specific letter. Notice when I solve this equation for R was on one side of the equation. Everything else was on the other side with no r in it. Do you see it? So this process is called solving literal equations. So with that in mind, we would like to do more examples, so get a kind of like gist of what this section is all about. And then I'll tell you why we're doing this. The bottom line is to what? Manipulate a given formula and write it in terms of what? Write what specific letter in that formula in terms of the rest of the letters in the formula. Okay, here's a typical problem. Given a formula, d is equal to r times t, could you solve this equation for t? So we like to isolate this equation for t. So we like to manipulate this formula such that t is on one side of the equation and everything else is on the other side of the equation with no t in it. So what I do, just like before, I look at the side of the equation where t is, because I was asked to solve for t. I see it's in the right side, and I see there's a multiplication sign between r and t. So to isolate what? T, I divide both sides by r. And the r's cancel. So t is equal to d divided by r, which means to find time, all I have to do is divide what? Distance by what? Speed. So there it is. We're done. So Please note a couple of steps or items here. One is, notice t is on one side of the equation by itself. And then the next thing to note is what? Everything else is on the other side of the equation without what? T. So there should be no t on the right side. That's what we mean by solving an equation for a specific letter. Okay, let's take a look at this equation. 3x plus y equals 5. Okay, solve for x. So we like to isolate x. In other words, at the end of the day, we like x to be on one side of the equation. Everything else, okay, on the opposite side without x. So let's see how would you go from here to there. Okay, take a look at the equation and see which side of the equation your desired variable is located at. Well, in this case, I'm trying to solve for x, so I have to look at the left side because that's where the x is. Okay, so the first thing is to get rid of the y, so subtract y from each side. So you get 3x equals 5 minus y. Remember, we're trying to solve for 1x, not 3x. So what I do is divide both sides by 3. So the 3's cancel on the left side, so x is equal to what? 5 minus y over 3. End of the problem. Once again, notice somehow I managed to have the desired what? Letter on one side, everything else on the other side without that letter. Do you see it? So let's do a few more, and so we can get used to this. This is A is equal to L times W, solve for L. You know what that is. That's the area of a rectangular shape. So the rectangle, so this is rectangle, has 2 length and 2 width, correct? And this is area. Area is like how much carpeting do I need to carpet this room. So I multiply length by width, so I can go and buy so many square yards of carpet from Home Depot. Because I'm trying to solve for L, so I have to look at the side of the equation where that letter is located, and then what? Look at the operation between the letter you're trying to isolate and remaining letters. I see multiplication. Opposite of multiplication is what? Division. So I'm going to divide both sides by W. So the W's cancel. So lo and behold, A is equal to A over W. And I'm done. Notice the idea was to put L on one side, everything else on the other side without L. So this says to find the length of the what? Rectangle, you divide area by its width. This guy is also related to rectangle. Instead of area, sometimes we are interested to find the perimeter. That means how much lumber do I need to put a fence in my backyard? And let's say the backyard is in a rectangular shape. So I go around the backyard and what? Add these 4 sides. So I got 2 of these and 2 of those. And this is called perimeter of a rectangle. So now this time we're looking at what? The edges or the sides of a rectangle as opposed to what's inside the rectangle. So that's the difference between area and a perimeter. Okay, we're trying to solve for W. So on the right side, that's where the W is. So the first thing I do, I look at what? What's going on between 2L and 2W? It looks like 2L has been added to 2W. So I'm going to what? Apply the opposite of addition, which is subtraction. So subtract 2L from each side. These guys cancel. So we get 2P minus 2L is equal to 2W. Keep in mind you were asked to solve for 1W, so you don't need 2. So just like equations, you divide both sides by 2. The 2's cancel. So W is equal to P minus 2L over 2. End of the problem. Once again, we isolated or solved the equation for W in terms of everything else. Notice on the right side, there is no evidence of W. Do you see it? The only problem is, warning, make sure that what? You do not cancel the 2's, okay? Because the minus sign will not let you. Okay, let me give you an example. So P, or I should say in this case, W, if it is P minus 2L over 2, please do not cancel this, yes? This would be wrong. Why is that? Well, let me give you an example. Suppose you have 10 minus 2 over 2. Okay, 10 minus 2 is 8. 8 over 2 is what? 4. But if you cancel the 2's, the answer is 10, which is wrong. So the idea is, if there is a minus or plus between numbers, you cannot what? Cancel the common factors. Okay, the minus sign won't let you. However, you could do this. Because the denominator contains a single number and the top is subtraction, it could be also addition. You can split the fraction and write it as P over 2 minus 2L over 2. In other words, split the single fraction into 2 separate fractions with the common denominator. However, reduce these now resulting fractions to their lowest terms. This guy is in pretty good shape, but this guy, the 2's cancel. So the alternative form is P over 2 minus L. So either of these two answers happens to be correct. Either P minus 2L over 2, please do not cancel the 2's, or W is equal to P over 2 minus L. The next example is area. So this is also area equals half of base times height. So as you can tell, this is solve for B. So this is about a triangle, three-sided shape. Here is the base. Okay, here is the height. Half of the base times height gives you the area of a triangle. Okay, so the question is, can you solve this equation for B? Well, I see what? 3 dots, 2 dots. I see that I have a multiplication of 3 numbers, namely 1/2, B, and H. First thing I do is divide both sides by 1/2. Remember, this is multiplication. Opposite of multiplication is division. So to get rid of 1/2, I have to divide both sides by 1/2. But dividing by a fraction is exactly the same as multiply both sides by a reciprocal of 1/2, which is 2 over 1, which is 2. So to say let's divide both sides by 1/2, that's exactly the same as let's multiply both sides by 2. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to multiply both sides by 2. So on the left side, I got A. Here I got 1/2, B, and H. Why did I do that for? Check this out. Here it is. Take a look at this portion of the right side. Looks like I'm multiplying 2 fractions. How do you multiply 2 fractions? First, you cross-reduce them, then you multiply. 2 goes into 2 once. So I get 2A is equal to B times H. So I got rid of the fractions. That was the whole idea behind what? Dividing both sides by 1/2, which is the same as multiplying both sides by 2. Remember, I'm trying to solve for B, and I see a multiplication between B and H, so I'm going to divide both sides by H. So the H is canceled, so I get B is equal to 2A over H, final answer. Once again, the letter which I was hoping to solve for is on one side, everything else is on the other side without that letter. This guy is accumulated amount is equal to principal plus interest. P times R times T is interest. That's principal times interest rate times time. Question is, can you solve for r? Okay. How do I do that? First, you got to get rid of this p. Okay, there's a plus p. So opposite of plus is minus. So I'm going to subtract p from both sides. So I'm going to get a minus p is equal to p times r times t. Keep in mind, I'm trying to solve for r. But between p and r and t, I see dots. That means multiplication. Opposite of multiplication is what? Division. So I'm going to divide both sides by p times t. Okay. So p's cancel, t's cancel on the right side. So r is equal to a minus p over pt. Final answer. So that means the interest rate is equal to accumulated amount minus the principal divided by principal times time. Once again, do not cancel the p's. Do not cancel the p's. Why? The minus sign won't let you, right? Can't do it. All right. So more examples. Let's say you got solved this equation for y. First thing I do is clear the fractions. Okay, because one out of many things which we hate in this class is fractions. So clear them out. How? Give a denominator of 1 to 2. So now you have three fractions, x over 4, y over 6, 2 over 1. Find the lowest common denominator of all these individual fractions, namely 4 and 6 and 1. Find the smallest number which 4 divides into, 6 divides into, 1 divides into. The lowest number is 12 because 4 goes into 12, so does 6, so does 1. So next step is what? Multiply both sides by 12. So I go, okay, 12, x over 4 minus y over 6 equals 12, 2 over 1. Notice I put the problem inside the parentheses. In front of the parentheses on both sides, I put LCD. So now give a denominator of 1. So step 3 is remove the parentheses, correct? How do you do that? Well, you multiply 12 over 1 by x over 4 minus 12 over 1 by y over 6, 12 over 1 by 2 over 1. Notice inside the boxes, I have multiplication of fractions. Do you see it? Right? How do you multiply fractions? You cross-reduce them before you multiply. 4 goes into 12 3 times, 6 goes into 12 2 times, and on the right side, you got nothing to what? Cancel, correct? So what do we have? 3x minus 2y is equal to 2 times 12 is 24. Keep in mind we were asked to solve for y, correct? So what do? I kind of see this is positive 3x, so I subtract 3x from each side first. So I get negative 2y equals negative 3x plus 24. Remember, the idea was solve for 1y, not negative 2y. So divide each of these guys by negative 2. Okay, all the way from left to right, all the way across, divide every single term on both sides by this guy, negative 2, which is called numerical coefficient. So y, negative over negative is positive, equals negative over negative is positive, 3/2 of x, positive over negative is negative, and 2 goes into 24 12 times. In chapter 3, this is called what? Slope intercept form of equation of a line. So it turns out 3/2 is the slope, how sharp the line is, and negative 12 is where the line intersects the y-axis. So we'll see this in chapter 3. Next one is ax plus by equals c, solve for y. So this is called standard form. of equation of a line. So the question is, can you put the equation in what? Slope-intercept form. So how do you do this? Once again, there is a plus ax, so subtract ax from each side. So these guys cancel, so you get by is equal to c minus ax. Keep in mind, you were asked to solve for 1y, not b times y, so that's times. Opposite of multiplication is division, so you divide both sides by b. So the b's cancel, so y is equal to c minus ax over b, end of the problem. However, to put this in the slope-intercept form, you split the what? You split the fractions. So you kind of write it as negative a over bx plus c over b. Okay, split the fraction into what? Two separate fractions with the common denominator. So this way you can tell what the slope and the y-intercept is. Turns out the slope is negative a over b, and the y-intercept is what? C over b. But that wasn't the idea. The idea was solve for y, and I did. So I'm good here for this answer. Either of these answers are okay, guys. Right? This guy is called point slope formula. Okay. So the point is x1, y1, and the slope is m. The idea is, can you solve the equation for m? I see between m and this quantity, there is a multiplication sign. If there is no sign, by default, that means multiplied. So this is really super easy, despite of its looks. All I have to do is what? Divide both sides by this guy, x minus x1. These guys cancel. So m, slope, is y minus y1 over x minus x1. End of the problem. Do we all see it? So the idea is what? Given an equation or formula, can you solve that formula for a specific letter in the formula? At the end of the day, you should have that specific letter on one side, everything else on the other side without that letter. So this is somehow, think of it as what? Manipulating the formula. I mean, rewriting this in a different format. Finally, we got this formula. C is equal to 5 over 9 times the quantity f minus 32, solve for f. Just to give you a background what this is like Celsius. It's a unit of measurement for temperature in metric system. And this is Fahrenheit. This is how we measure temperature in this country. Overseas countries, like European countries, they measure the temperature in Celsius. So the question is, C is equal to 5 over 9 times quantity f minus 32. Can you isolate this equation for f? In other words, can you write f on one side, everything else on the opposite side? Okay? Yes. Because there is a multiplication between 5 over 9 and what? This quantity, because there's no plus or minus between 5 over 9 and this parentheses. So by default, that means multiply. Opposite of multiplication is division. So we would say what? Let's divide both sides by 5 over 9. But when you divide a number by a fraction, that's exactly the same as multiplying both sides by the reciprocal of that fraction. But this is the same as multiplying what? Both sides by reciprocal of that fraction, which is 9 over 5. To say divide both sides by 5 over 9, it is just like you say multiply both sides by reciprocal, which is flip the fraction and then multiply as opposed to divide. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to multiply both sides by flip version of 5 over 9. So here's a C. Here is 5 over 9. Here is f minus 32. Correct? So now, why did I do that for? Well, if you look at the right side, you see I'm multiplying two fractions. Do you see it? How do you multiply fractions? You don't need LCD. You just have to cross reduce these guys. 9 goes into 9 once. 5 goes into 5 once. All you have left is 1. So because there is nothing left in front of the parentheses, I'm just going to go ahead and drop the parentheses as well. So I got 9/5 C. Remember, we were supposed to solve for f. I don't need -32 what? Next to the f, so I'm going to add 32. Okay, these guys cancel. So f is equal to 9/5 C plus 32. Final answer. So somehow I manipulated the formula and wrote the formula, what, for f in terms of C. So the question is, what is the difference between the formula given in the problem and the one I manipulated it and write it as f equals a function of C? Well, the difference is this. This formula is used when you know F, Fahrenheit temperature, and you like to find its equivalent temperature in Celsius. This formula is like you know what C, you know the temperature overseas, but you like to find out exactly what the equivalent of that temperature is in this country. You want to find F. Okay, so that's the difference. Let's do a quick example so you get a feel for what's going on here. Suppose I tell you right now it's 68 degrees in this country, or in this California, or in Long Beach. What would be the temperature, the same equivalent temperature in what? In the overseas, European countries. Let's say in, I don't know, in France. Well, what you do, you kind of use this formula. You go C is equal to 5/9 times 5 minus 32. Okay, we know the F. We like to find C. So C is equal to 5/9, 68 minus 32. Okay, that would give us what? 636. Okay, this is like multiplication of two fractions. Can you see it if you give a denominator of 1 to 36? How do you multiply two fractions? Remember, this is 5/9 times 36/1. Cross reduce, 9 goes into 36, what? 4 times? 4 times 5 is what? 20 degrees. So what are you saying? I'm saying 68 degrees Fahrenheit here in this country is just like 20 degrees Celsius, let's say over in Paris. Incidentally, 68 degrees is kind of like room temperature. So the room temperature overseas is 20 as opposed to 68, because they go by different what? Units of temperature. However, the problem is, if I tell you, let's say in London, the temperature is 40 degrees, what would be the temperature here in this country? Should I wear my swimming suit and jump into the pool, or should I turn on the heater? I mean, what is this? What kind of temperature is this? Well, let's find out. Now I'm going to use the second formula, F equals 9/5 C plus 32. I'm going to replace the C with what? 40. Okay. So this looks like, if I give a denominator of 1, it looks like I have a multiplication of two fractions, then I have addition. Keep in mind, the order of operation says what? Do the multiplication first before you do the addition. But looks like I'm multiplying two fractions. So to multiply two fractions, remember, we reduce, cross reduce. 5 goes into 48 times. 9 times 8 is what? 72 plus 32. That's what? 104 degrees Fahrenheit. It's super hot. So I should definitely jump into the pool ASAP.